Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo!
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I'm very excited for you guys to hear from our very next guest. I have virtually in front of me, Renee Bauer. She is a podcast host. She is incredible in what she does as I believe a divorce attorney. And we're going to talk about how you can be happy even after divorce if you're currently struggling or even contemplating, maybe going through getting a divorce and kind of maybe struggling with some guilt and shame around that. As you guys know, I wrote my book, Once Upon a Diet, where I talk about the parallels between dieting, dating, and romantic relationships. And I always say I'm not a relationship expert. I can just talk about the parallels, but it's helpful to have someone kind of come in and kind of use their experience and kind of see what they've seen through, there's probably beauty in divorce. And then there's probably parts of divorce that aren't so beautiful or don't seem to be as beautiful in the middle of it. And so I'm super excited to have Renee here. So Renee, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Tony. I'm so thrilled to be here to talk about all of these things.
Yeah, so excited to have you. So the first question I always ask, it's a 3-part question. I would love for you to introduce yourself to the listeners by sharing who you are, what you do, and more importantly, why you do what you do.
Yeah, I love that. So I have been a divorce lawyer for almost 2 decades, which kind of blows my mind, but almost 20 years I'm going into practicing in this particular area of law. And I have a law firm in Connecticut that I manage. And I have spent a lot of my time in divorce litigation in the courtroom, battling it out for people and seeing that, the fight isn't necessarily worth it. And it's really mindset around divorce. But why I do it is because I'm also twice divorced myself. And for the longest time, I had kept my professional world and my personal world really compartmentalized. It was so separate. So I'd go into work and I'd be the buttoned up lawyer and I would act the act and play the role. And then I'd go home and I'd be a broken version of myself because I had so much shame around not just one divorce, but 2. And I felt like such a failure. Mm-hmm. And when I actually went on a podcast, my very first interview ever, a few years back, I talked about my story and I was really just raw and authentic in a way that I had never been before. And I was inundated with messages from other women who said, that's my story too. Thank you for sharing. And I realized that keeping my personal story to myself and keeping that shame to myself was not helping anyone. I certainly wasn't healing from it. And I knew that there was value in speaking it to the world. And that's where my mission had started, that I wasn't just a divorce lawyer doing the work, but now I was going to cross over and really talk about divorce in a different way, talk about the shame, talk about the guilt, all of the feelings that go along with it. And also, as you mentioned in your intro, talk about the beauty that can be the outcome of divorce. And, once you have someone going through that and saying, I get it, it becomes a little bit easier to face it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I definitely know we're going to get into that. But the first thing I would love to address is, like you mentioned, the shame. Why do you think there's so much shame around it? Like, why do you feel like it was so hard for you too to also kind of admit that? Or I don't even, that's the thing. It's like, sounds like it's like an admission, like it's terrible, like, but it's not. Like, well, where do we think the shame comes from?
I think it's generational. Like, I think that, so I grew up with Italian parents. They're still married.
So you gotta stop there. You're an Italian background. I have an Italian background. It's like, if you were together, like, I don't know Italian grandparents that haven't been together for less than 50 years. And they probably did have beautiful marriages, but like, it's just not the way of the world anymore.
It's not. And so in that mentality, it's my grandparents, my parents, like, you stay together, you stick it out. Mm-hmm. And there was so much shame just in I have a brother who's gay. I mean, there was so much shame there for the longest time. And so it was like, to the world, you put on this front that everything is perfect. And I had, for my first marriage, I had this big, beautiful wedding in Boston. And, you put on this big show. And then at the end, I got divorced 5 years after that. There was like, the response was like, well, what are we going to tell people? Like, they came to your wedding. What are we going to say to them? And so, I think that projected onto me, and I felt like a failure. And I felt like, why couldn't I just be happy? What's wrong with me? And so then you start to have the conversation that so many people have when they're going through divorce, when there's kids, is I'm ruining my kids. It's selfish for me to want this. And you keep all of that inside of you rather than talking about it. And when you surround yourself with supportive community, you start to shed some of those layers of shame. But I wasn't doing that. I had kept it to myself, and I didn't have a community around me. I didn't seek it because I'm like, this is what I do for work. I got this. Like, this is, this is all good. It's in control, but it really wasn't, because I really wasn't being honest with how I was feeling at the time.
Right. So is that what you usually tell clients who you're working with to kind of help with that, get rid of that shame? Do you often tell them to find like a support group? Do you tell them to talk about it? What are some of the tips you have to help people get over that?
Yeah, so I have a private Facebook group. I direct people there. I tell them to find, there's a ton of professionals in the divorce space just on social media who are really promoting uplifting and positive messages, and follow them. Even getting a divorce coach, that's like a new thing that's out there. People are getting divorce coaches to kind of help them through that. Go to therapy. Like, therapy is something that everyone should go to at some point in their life, and having a therapist to talk to, and talking to friends, and not kind of keeping it bottling up, but being careful about not bringing the toxicity into talking to friends and family, and just talking about maybe you need support, you need help, you need someone to help pick up the kids or cook dinner or something like that kind of support, not bashing an ex, because that doesn't ever serve anyone well. And it's having those conversations and just saying it's okay to feel this way. Like, at some point you're going to feel this way, and I'm acknowledging it's normal. You'll get through it. And here are some of the things to help you work through it.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like there's probably, when you work with clients, they've all came to that turning point where for a long time, they're probably battling this idea of divorce. And now they finally made the decision, whether it was they themselves or their partner or collectively as a couple. What do you think is that turning point? Have you noticed like a certain thing that it's like, when do you decide? Because it does feel very final, right? A divorce is very final, whereas you could fight for years, you could argue for years, you could not be on the same page, but like, where is that turning point for so many where it's like, okay, this is the decision that we're going to end it?
It's so different for everyone. I had a turning point. I had a moment when my son was born. He was an infant. He was in my car. I was driving down the street, and I said to myself, I had a conversation with myself that said, now that I have him in my life, I don't need anything else to be happy. And I wasn't acknowledging that before that point, something wasn't quite right. And so that was the moment that I acknowledged that, he's here and now all is good. It took me 2 years to file for divorce. So I wasn't at that point that I was ready to really face the truth about it. But it was definitely a turning point, because it was that even to this day, my son's 16 years old now. Like, I remember that moment so clearly. And I think for everyone, it's different. I think that people battle between what their heart is telling them and what their head is telling them. And when I see people come to me and you ask them why they're there and what they want to do, often they'll first speak from the heart, and they'll speak from a place of they know what is true. They know that they're not happy. And in order to get to that place, they have to move forward. They know that their marriage can't be fixed. But then what they do is they flip that conversation. They start talking about, well, I'm not going to have enough money. And what are we going to do with the house? And we have a vacation planned for the spring. And maybe I should just get through that or get through summer vacation. And so their head starts chiming in. And when their head starts chiming in, the volume on their heart and their intuition and what they really know is true gets really turned way, way down. I always tell people, tap in back to your heart. No, I'm not a great meditator, but I do love it for the purpose of, like, if there's something I need clarity on, to really sit and just kind of ponder and meditate a little bit and just sit in the quiet. Like, some people get kind of crazy when you say like meditation, they don't like it, but then just sit in the quiet. Just turn the music off, turn the noise off, and just sit. And a lot of times what you really want will come out really clear. That voice is so, so clear. So I tell people they have to turn the volume way, way down on all of the chatter that's happening in their head and all of the external influences of people telling them what they think they know is best for them, and really tap into what is it that they want? What is it that they know is true? Regardless of what is practical or what is financially feasible, just pay attention to what their heart's telling them. And that's usually the indicator of what steps they need to take.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. So you mentioned it before in your situation, just in general, when kids are involved, because I think kids make it a lot harder. So yeah, your heart might tell you, this is what I need, but then your head might tell you, but like, what do my kids need? And it might not align in regards to, maybe your kids want you to stay together. So how did you, either you personally or have you helped clients kind of work through kind of realizing that maybe it's not the best decision to stay if it's not gonna, if it's not what the kids want,
Yeah. So one question I always ask people who are having that conversation and that battle within themselves is, if it was your child, your son or daughter, and they had the relationship that you have with your spouse, what would you say to them? Mm-hmm. What would you say? And a lot of times the relationship is so toxic and is so unhealthy, and it's so clear what they should be doing, but they're stuck in this repeat conversation of, oh, I'm going to harm my kids if I do this. So when you phrase it that way, when you say, what would you tell your daughter if her husband was acting like this or doing this? And usually they'll say, well, I would tell her or tell him that they had to leave because they're not happy and that they're being mistreated. And a lot of times that's an eye opener, but it's still really hard. I don't think there's a magic phrase you can say to make someone feel different. I know it was something I battled with for a really, really long time, because I always had that guilt. And I had the guilt when my son wasn't with me. I had that guilt when I was missing him, or when my ex, who was a really good guy, but would send me pictures of like, hey, this is what we're doing, like, to be nice. And then all of a sudden I feel like, oh my God, I'm missing, like, I'd sob because I've been like, I'm missing out on all of this. I'm missing out on a part of his life. But those feelings are usually wrapped up in how we feel, not how your child's feeling. So like, if I were to be honest, my son was having a great time. He was just enjoying doing whatever activity they were doing. And he wasn't looking back saying, oh, I wish my parents were together. He was just in the moment having fun. And you work through that. The more time that passes, the easier it gets. And quite frankly, when you have teenagers, it almost becomes a blessing, because now you want the extra support. You want the break. Like, when you have teenagers, all you're doing is driving them. It is not custody. Yeah. It is not custody with the other parent. It is custody with the friends and the girlfriends and the boyfriends. And all you do is drive them from here and there and back and forth. And so having another parent, like, have them, it's their weekend, is like a little break. It's like, oh, hey, I can have my time back to myself. So it does get easier. And that would be my message is, yes, it's going to be hard. You're going to like sit in the ick and sit in the suck, and you're going to kind of cycle through that, but it does get easier. When you're missing your kids, do something for yourself. Start to tap into like, what is it that you always wanted to do? When I was going through that, I picked up yoga. Had never done it before. I'm like, I'm going to try this thing. I fell in love with it. And that became the thing that I would do on Saturday mornings when my son wasn't with me. It got me up. I met some new people. So it's doing things like that, tapping into maybe a creative outlet that something you loved as a kid and you haven't done in a really long time. It's filling your time up with things that kind of bring you joy, and things that maybe you haven't paid attention to just because you haven't had time because you're too busy parenting. So it's and sometimes you have to force that. You don't want to go to the class, but you get up and you do it, and you'll probably never regret it that you actually showed up.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that in the beginning, like you said, you might not even know what that is, because I feel like especially when you're in a relationship and in a marriage that maybe isn't the healthiest, you're probably being pulled from your passions. You're exhausted, you're stressed, you're emotionally drained. Maybe you don't have even time to think about the things that you would enjoy doing. Right. And so now you don't have, maybe, you normally would have your kids 24/7, and now you get a weekend free and you're like, what do I do? Because your whole life became like trying to fix the marriage and being a parent. You lost your identity in it. right? So I think what you're saying is like, use that time to kind of rediscover what lights you up and, what you enjoy. So yeah, that's super powerful. So is that one of your tips too, when it comes to like creating a life you love after divorce? Is that kind of what you encourage? Or is there anything else there that you would encourage for someone who's like, it almost like sounds like they're almost like starting over per se?
Yeah. I mean, you get to reinvent yourself. You get to do, show up in any way that you want, be anyone you want, and you get to have fun with it. And I think so often as adults, we lose that sense of fun and wonder. We're too busy being responsible and too busy being the adult. And then start to have fun again. Start to date yourself. Like, bring yourself out to a really nice restaurant. And if you haven't done that as an adult, I really challenge you to do it, because it's so powerful to sit there, not at a drive-through where, and I think that's like the instinct is, if we're by ourselves, we're going to get something quick, we're going to go home with it. But like, get dressed up, go to a really nice restaurant and sit there with a book if you want, sit there and just observe. And they're so powerful doing that. And, and you kind of like, you sit up a little taller and you're like, all right, I can do that. And then the next step is bring yourself away for a weekend. Go on a solo vacation. That's powerful. Start to get really uncomfortable doing things that challenge you and scare you. Mm-hmm. Because every time you do that, you move the needle a little bit. And you're like, oh, I can handle, I did that. That was fine. Dinner was great. Now I'm going to go away for a couple of days. And after that, you're like, maybe I'll do a solo vacation. Maybe I'll start the business. Like, you keep moving the needle and you keep pushing yourself to do things that you didn't think you were capable of. And I think that's the beauty of divorce. I think divorce, knocks you down. It takes you out. It makes you feel so powerless at times. It makes you feel like a failure. And then there's no place else to go but up. You have the opportunity to rebuild from there. And every step of the way, you get to remind yourself, like, I made it through this. What else can I do? If I can do that, if I can survive this, how can I actually thrive?
I'm interrupting your podcast because I need to talk about poop. So sorry, but as a dietitian, I talk about poop a lot. And if you struggle with gas, bloating, diarrhea, acid reflux, and/or constipation, then you're definitely going to want to listen up. Gut Personal is the first line of personalized gut supplements, allowing you to create a customized protocol to address your symptoms, support your healing, and optimize your gut health. And the best part? Gut Personal was founded by my friend and colleague, registered dietitian Bridget Carroll. She has years of experience healing women's gut symptoms and improving their gut health. Also, bonus about Gut Personal, it's 100% female founded, funded, and staffed. Women empowerment for the win. All of the products are FDA tested and approved. So if you've been experiencing gas, bloating, diarrhea, acid reflux, and/or constipation, or even if you just want to take some preventative supplements to keep your gut strong and healthy, then I highly recommend starting your gut healing journey by taking their quiz at gutpersonal.com. This quiz was created to better understand your gut health symptoms so that you can get emailed product recommendations to support your healing and optimizing your gut health. Click the link in my show notes or go directly to gutpersonal.com to take the quiz, and make sure to use tipswithtony10 at checkout to get 10% off your order.
And had I not gotten divorced, I wouldn't have started my business. I wouldn't have grown my business. I wouldn't be speaking on stages. I wouldn't have written the book. Like, my first book I wrote was when I was going through my divorce, because I got so sick of just sitting around crying every weekend when my son wasn't with me. I'm like, I love writing. Let me start writing again. Let me use it. And so let me tell you, sometimes I was tapping away on the laptop, still sobbing, but it was like, let me start to use that pain. Let me start to use it into something and put the energy into something else. And that's where the power and that's where the magic is.
I love that. I love that. So from writing your books, helping many clients, going through divorce yourself, what were like kind of the biggest lessons you learned where you think would be helpful for our listeners in regards to, was there any point where at which you where you look back and you're like, oh, that may have been workable? Or were there any points where you realized like, okay, if I could talk to any of my clients and like they say this, I'm telling them like if they're on the fence, it's time to go. Like, is there anything specific other than like the obvious, like very toxic, abusive, hopefully you didn't go through that, but like, and, for anyone listening, like if it's clearly abusive and maybe that's not as clear, maybe we even do need to define that, between like mental abuse and physical abuse and how they're still equally just not good and definitely need to, needs to be healed. But are there anything specific that you like lessons you learned where you realized, okay, this is not something that's workable versus maybe working with a client, seeing like they're going through some issues like, actually, you know what, if you're not really quite ready yet, believe it or not, there might be something workable here. And you don't have to go through the divorce if you don't want to.
It's funny because when someone comes to talk to me, I know probably within the first 3 minutes where they are on that fence. And it is very obvious when someone is exploring options, they're defeated, but yet they still are invested in the relationship. And it's clear to me that their heart is actually telling them to stay or do the work. And then I always encourage them to go to marriage counseling, get some outside help. If both parties are committing to working through the relationship and getting some outside help, then maybe they can save it and they can work through it. But it's also really clear if someone's sitting there and they are checked out and it's just the guilt or the shame holding them back. It's that category between like, if it's abusive, it's easy, right? If someone had an affair, well, maybe it's easy, but maybe it's not. But if someone's in a relationship that just is okay and just fine, like if they say, well, it's just fine, but they're not really happy, then, and I always say, well, at what point is like good enough, not good enough for you anymore? Right. Like we shouldn't be coasting through life feeling just fine. Like we should be loving our life. We should be loving our partner. Like if your kids are going off to college, this is something else I ask a client and say, okay, if your kids are going off to college, you just drop him or her off. And now you look at your spouse, how do you feel? Is it dread? Like, what are we going to say to each other? Or is it excitement about like, what are we going to explore together? So yes, relationships have their challenges and you have to work through things. Absolutely. And that's worth the effort. But at the end of the day, how do you really feel about your spouse? Is it something that you want to put the effort in? Do you like each other? Like that's huge. Do you like each other's company? And if the answer is no, and neither of you or one of you can't come back from that, then that's a pretty good indication that you shouldn't just stick it out just because you're putting your own happiness on hold. And life is too short, life is way too short to stay in something that's not making you happy.
I love that. In my book, Once Upon a Diet, I use the analogy of, and I always use her acting name, Rachel McAdams, in the Notebook, but her Allie, and I always like forget. Yes. So in Allie, she could have had a fine life with the boyfriend who, with the family approved, he had the money, doing all the things. Like it would have been fine. She would have had the house, everything would have been fine. Yeah. But it really wasn't at the core of what she deserved and what she wanted, which was passion and true love and like deep love and like a commitment and like just like so much more than just fine. So I'm glad that you brought that up because I think it's important for people to kind of realize that you get to choose and you don't have to settle for. I love what you said. It was like, when are you going to realize that just good enough isn't good enough for something? What was that? That was a great line. Yeah.
So that, when you make that decision that good enough is no longer just fine for you. It's like, and I have friends, it really breaks my heart. I have friends in relationships like that and in marriages like that. And it's so sad. And it's like, you have a choice. And because yes, it's a hard choice, but if you make that, you can set both of you free. And then you can maybe actually be happy. Because then what happens, in those situations, they actually both report that their kids are unhappy or are feeling the impacts of seeing the conflict or seeing that their parents don't like each other. Yeah. And we think, okay, we're going to stay together for the sake of the kids, but they see that the parents like actually don't like each other and don't interact, or they're constantly fighting. And well, that impacts kids just as much, or if not more than divorce, because it's not divorce that causes problems in kids, it's conflict. So if they're seeing the conflict in their own house, then that's what they're going to take. And that's what they're going to model their own relationships like. And so sometimes you have to make the hard decisions for your kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad we brought up kids again, because I think that's the other tricky thing is not even just like, okay, you made the decision that you're not going to be together, but then it comes down to like custody battles and, when do you get the kid? Like, I feel like that could be part of the fear too. It's like understanding that, you and your spouse are not good together, and that you do need to separate. And it's best for the kids. But at the same time, like maybe now, like losing that part of yourself of like, now I might not be able to see my kids as much and like all that. So I know you kind of spoke about finding ways to kind of fall in love with yourself and all that stuff. But do you have like any tips on how to just make co-parenting easier and how to kind of like let that be okay? And, maybe, because then also too, don't forget, then you might get remarried again. Right. And so now your ex now has a partner that is now kind of parenting your child as well. I mean, it sounds like your kids are older. But like, even like from experience with me and my boyfriend aren't married, but we basically are co-parenting his, now she's going to be 6, but when we met, she was 2. So, I mean, that's hard. I'll just leave it at that for privacy.
Yeah.
It's just not easy.
It is not easy. And there's all kinds of dynamics that happen when you blend families. And so blended families could be a whole episode on itself, and co-parenting could be another whole episode. But co-parenting can be really difficult. And sometimes people have to co-parent with someone who is high conflict, and then it becomes even more difficult. And so, something to keep in mind with co-parenting, I think the easiest tip is when you interact, try to remove the emotion from it. So if you have a high conflict parent, or if you have another parent who likes to poke fights, you don't have to show up to every fight you're invited to. You get to disengage from that and choose not to communicate or involve yourself in that. So your communication, there's an attorney and I think it's a psychologist or psychiatrist named Bill Eddy, and he calls it the BIF method. So when communicating with someone who's high conflict, I think this can apply to any co-parent. You're going to keep it brief. You're going to keep it informative, friendly, and firm. So brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And if you kind of follow that model, you get to remove the emotion from it a little bit, and just, and try to not respond in kind. If they're, texting you with all caps or giving you an emoji with their middle finger, you can respond and say, okay, I'm going to keep it brief, friendly, informative, firm, and move on from this. It is really hard, especially when you have a co-parent who is really, really difficult. And sometimes you just have to let things go. Sometimes, even if you just have just a general co-parenting relationship, it's like, all right, sometimes there has to be flexibility. They're asking to switch a day. Why are you giving them a hard time? Just to give them a hard time, or because there's a good reason? Okay, that's fine then. But if it's just because, nope, you asked for it, I said no, then you have to kind of evaluate and say, well, at some point you're going to want that favor in return. So what are they going to say to you when you ask for the favor? Most likely they're going to say no. So it's just remembering, like, flexibility is going to make everyone's life so much easier throughout the years, because kids need flexibility. And as their ages change and as they grow up and as they have activities, you're really going to need that. Trying to follow a parenting plan, it's there, it's court ordered, it's for guidance. It's always what you can default to, but sometimes it's just impossible to kind of live by something like that without having without having that flexibility to be able to switch it up and modify things without running back to court. I mean, you can run back to court every time you need to, but who wants to do that? It's expensive. It interrupts your peace. You have to deal with court again. You have to, no one wants to do that. Like, the best thing to do is you sign the agreement, and then you're able to change things up and just be flexible with each other.
And use that as like, listen, we have this agreement too. I think that's the other problem too, where I think parents might try to do it without a court order, kind of just figure it out. And then that's where there's almost like too much flexibility. There's too much, like he said, she said, there's nothing actually controlling. But I think what you're saying is, like, we don't need to go back to court 1,000 times, but definitely at least the first court order might be a good start.
You need a baseline. You need a baseline.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Amazing. This is so good. I want to keep going. Do you have time for one more question or two?
Sure.
Okay. So, I guess, like, you've seen a lot, right? So, Are there any mistakes that you see kind of clients making that it's making the process harder? Rather than, we admit that it's going to be hard, right? It's going to be messy. It's a long game. It's worth it in the end, but it's going to be messy and it's going to be hard in the beginning. But is there anything that you see people doing that might be making it even harder, where it's just like, you know what, let's just commit to not doing it?
Yes, there's so many. Okay, I'll narrow it down. One, arguing over principle. No one wins on principle. It's very expensive and you'll never be happy. Two, looking for justice. The divorce court is not there to dole out justice. It doesn't exist in divorce court. They're just there to untangle your marriage, all of the assets. So looking for justice is just setting you up for expectations to be disappointed. And number three, it's not being intimately involved with the finances. You have to get so familiar with your finances, budgeting, what you have, and don't let someone else tell you what you should be doing. So a lot of times I'll have clients rely on me to tell them what to do, and they're not familiar with their if they've never had to deal with it before, not familiar with the numbers. They don't know. Like, this is the opportunity to really get comfortable with it. Know what it's going to look like to live, what your bills look like, what your investments look like, what you should be doing in terms of investing. So maybe you've never done it before, but now's the time to start, and don't pass that off to someone else and say, well, it was always his responsibility, not mine. That's not an excuse. Like, you really have to educate yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Because then you might stay in it even longer just because out of a position of not really knowing where to go or what to do. And that's, it's not funny.
Absolutely.
Either. So, okay, this is great. Any other tips or comments you want to add kind of to the listeners?
Yeah, just remember, this is just a moment. It's just a blip. It's just a little blip in your life. You'll get through it. It doesn't mean that this is your entire identity. It makes me nuts actually on forms when you have to check off married, single, divorced. I'm like, well, wait a second. I'm like, I'm divorced, but I'm also married. And it's so complicated. It's just a moment. Allow yourself to go through it and say, okay, what's next? What new adventure is coming my way? Our life is filled with rejections. And I like to say it's just redirection. So look at this as just a plot twist in your life. And now you're getting redirected to something better.
Absolutely. I love that. That's so great. And you're having an event soon, aren't you? Do you want to kind of share a little bit about it?
Yeah, I am. So April 30th in Connecticut, if anyone is in this part of the country, I have a live event it is not divorce specific, but it is female empowerment specific. So we are bringing in some really powerhouse speakers from all over the country, where we have main stage speakers, we have a DJ, we have a vendor market, we have breakout sessions that are educational, where we're covering everything from finances to changing your mindset, to authenticity, leadership, how to land a TED Talk. So all different topics for anyone. And I just wanted to create an event where women could come together with a really good high energy and connect with each other and be surrounded by a great community. So I'm pumped for this event. It's my first live event, and it's coming up in 2 months. And we have sold just about half our tickets right now.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know you're in Connecticut, and I'm in New York, and I'm in Westchester. So we're close. So what part of Connecticut?
Close. I'm in Hamden. The event is in Hamden.
Hamden? Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure how far that is for me, but I definitely want to attend if I can. What's the specific date you said?
April 30th. It's an all day on a Saturday.
That's amazing. That's very exciting.
Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
The speakers are coming in from California, from Texas. We just have some incredible speakers coming in. So I'm excited.
I'm putting it on my calendar, and definitely
awesome.
We'll put the link also to the sign up link in the show notes for people so they can attend. Is that how they would sign up? You'll just, okay, perfect. Yep. Perfect. So I'll put that there. And maybe you guys will see me there. I literally just heard about this and it sounds awesome. And it sounds like something would be very if I have to stay overnight, I'll stay overnight. If not, but it might be a quick drive for me. Who knows? New York is funny. I'm close to certain parts of Jersey, but 3 hours away from other parts of Jersey, and close to certain parts of Connecticut, and then 3 hours from other parts.
Yeah, definitely. We have people coming in from Canada, which was crazy when I saw ticket sales. I'm like, oh my God, that's nuts. So
amazing.
We have people attending from all parts of the country as well. So super cool. I hope you come.
Yeah, I'm excited. It sounds like it'll be great. Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for being here. How can people also just connect with you, follow you, ask any other questions if they might have?
Instagram is my favorite place to hang out, and they can find me at Ms. Renee Bauer. And I check all my DMs all the time and answer everything.
Amazing. All right. So I'll put the link in the show notes there. Thank you so much for being here. Guys, thank you for listening. If you found any of this helpful or anything resonated, feel free to take a screenshot of it, share it on your story, tag me and tag Renee on Instagram, or send it to a friend. And if you're not subscribed to the Tips with Tony podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button. A new episode comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. And when you're subscribed, you don't miss a beat. All right. Thank you so much for listening. As always, this is Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.